Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 11 in your textbook. There's lots of information in Chapter 11, so make sure you read it carefully. I'm just hitting the highlights here. Okay, let's talk about delivering your speech to your audience. Effective delivery brings all the elements of your speech together, all the planning, researching, organizing, practicing, and combines it with you, your vocal and physical delivery of your ideas, to present it all to the audience. This chart shows the 4 types of delivery methods, what they are, their advantages and disadvantages, as well as the typical situations in which they might be used. Let's look at each of them. Impromptu speaking is speaking with little or no preparation. They're spontaneous and in the moment, which can be good. They can also be disorganized and not very effective depending on the situation in which they're given. However, you actually give little impromptu speeches all the time. When you raise your hand in class to answer a question, or when you're talking in a group and someone asks you what you think. It can also happen at work meetings when your boss calls on you to explain something. So it's not completely foreign to you. The next type, extemporaneous speaking, is the kind of speaking we do in this class. It's very well planned, researched, organized, and practiced, and it allows the speaker to develop expertise on their topic, allows for a level of spontaneity, and allows the speaker to adjust to audience feedback. Its main disadvantage, as you've found out by now, is that the preparation process is time-consuming, but it's a skill that will serve you well in your college classes as well in professional and community presentations throughout your life. The other 2 types of delivery methods are best used in specific situations. Manuscript, which is basically reading an entire speech, is only done in circumstances where every word has to be chosen carefully, but it lacks spontaneity and can be uninteresting to listen to. It's mostly used in political speeches like the State of the Union address. And memorized speeches, where every word is committed to memory and there are no speaking notes, might allow for more movement and eye contact with the audience, but can seem artificial, and if you happen to forget your speech, you have nothing to fall back on. Of these 4 types, extemporaneous is by far the best one. There are many things that influence how we feel about speaking in public, as well as how we perform during delivery. The primary culture with which we identify often has a big influence on our ideas about public speaking. Some cultures are fairly comfortable with it, others are not. In some Asian cultures, it's considered rude to highlight one's own accomplishments, which makes them feel uncomfortable with the credibility step in the introduction. But since it's such a critical step, it should not be avoided. Some cultures are more comfortable interacting in small groups than presenting in large ones. And what one culture might see as nervousness in a speaker, another culture might see as being modest. Recognize that while your culture may have influenced your ideas about public speaking, because you're taking this class in America, you need to adapt to your audience, which is largely an American one. Gender also plays a role in delivery. Even in our modern day and age, women are still judged as less competent speakers than men, at least out in society, if not in this classroom. The book goes into more detail on this, but one of the reasons for this may be that women's voices tend to be both higher in pitch and softer in volume than men's. It's rare that I have to tell a man to speak louder, although it does happen. It's much more common for me to let a woman know that she needs to ramp up the volume so she can be heard by everyone in the room. There are also things that can affect fluency, which is the ease and accuracy of speaking. For instance, a certain portion of the population has issues with stuttering, which can impede the ability to smoothly deliver their speech. I don't lower someone's delivery score if they have this issue, so don't worry about that. I found that their classmates tend to be very supportive and patient with students who have speech impediments like stuttering. A class like this is a good place for you to practice patience with yourself and connecting with the audience in spite of this problem, seeking to get your message across to them. Dialect is the particular vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation used by a specific group of people. It tends to be regional and cultural in nature, like Southern or Boston or Australian. Most of us realize that other people speak with a particular dialect, but we don't think that we do. Trust me, everyone does. People have an unfortunate tendency to rate some other dialects negatively, even though there's no evidence to show that people who speak a dialect have any particular negative traits in common. If you speak a dialect that's markedly different from the majority of your audience, you need to understand this and make sure you're articulating your words clearly, pronouncing them correctly, and defining unfamiliar terms. This is particularly important if English is not your first language. You might need to practice more than other students, focusing on your pronunciation. Tutors at the Communication Center can help you with this. Then there's students with physical impairments, like mobility issues or visual or hearing impairments. In each case, you need to determine the best way for you to deliver the speech. It will probably involve some planning on your part, and you'll need to talk to me about your plan so I can make sure they'll work. The textbook has a very good discussion of the different choices you have as a speaker in this situation, and I'm happy to help you to make sure your speech is successful. Your voice is a major factor in getting your audience's attention and delivering the information in your speech to them. The term vocal mindfulness refers to paying attention to how you use your voice when you speak. There are different aspects of vocal variety you should be aware of. Your breath is the platform from which you use your voice. If you're not breathing well, which you might not be because you're nervous or you're slouching instead of standing up straight, then what comes out isn't going to be your optimal speaking voice. The textbook shows how breathing works and what you should do to have a good, strong speaking voice. Speak loudly. Don't yell, of course, but speak so that your voice can be heard at the back of the room. Most of our rooms aren't that big, but you'd be surprised how many people don't talk loud enough to be heard in them. That's because we generally talk in conversations where we only have to be heard by one or two people, so we aren't used to using more volume. Proper breathing can help, and so can practicing speaking louder. Vocal variety entails varying your rate, how fast and slow you speak, your pitch, how high and low your voice is on the musical scale, and your volume. The most interesting speakers vary all of these things as necessary to help get their message across to the audience. You've probably had at least one professor who lectured in a monotone voice, meaning they had very little variation in rate, pitch, and tone, and that's very hard to listen to for any length of time. Audiences will tune you out very quickly, so practice to avoid that. You also want to avoid vocalized pauses, which are things like you know, and like. We say them in conversation to keep control of our place in that conversation, to let the other people know we're still thinking and not done with our side of the conversation yet. But when they creep into a public speech, not only do they take up precious time, but they give the audience the impression that you're not quite sure of what you're saying or that you didn't practice enough. It's okay if you have the occasional vocalized pause. The problem occurs when they happen constantly throughout the speech. Sometimes students aren't even aware of how much they do this, and they're very surprised when I point it out to them. When you practice, try to be aware of whether you have this tendency or not, and work towards eliminating most of those vocalized pauses. Finally, make sure you articulate your words clearly and accurately. Public speaking has some conversational aspects, but it's more formal than everyday conversation. Incorrect pronunciation can negatively affect your credibility, so make sure you're certain of how to pronounce every word in your speech. How you appear to the audience and what you do with your body during the speech is a big part of the delivery process as well. You need to dress for the occasion and for your topic. What you wear and how you're groomed should match what you're doing. While I don't require professional business attire during speech days, some instructors do. But I expect that you will take into consideration that a large part of your credibility comes from what you look like. I don't mean how pretty or handsome you are. I mean you need to look like you're going to give a speech. If your attire doesn't match what you're saying, that can be disconcerting to the audience. If you're talking about how to interview for the job you want and you're wearing ripped jeans and a dirty t-shirt, no one is going to take you seriously. If you're doing a demonstration speech about how to do yoga poses and you're wearing a dress and high heels, that's not going to work very well. Keep those things in mind when you decide what to wear on speech day. If your topic doesn't necessarily require a certain type of outfit, dress one step up from how you usually dress, and you should be fine. Then, when you're up in front of us, face us and look at us. Try not to turn your back to us to look at the screen. Appropriate eye contact means you don't stare at any one person too long, but that you do take time to look at individual audience members briefly, scan the room, and look at someone else briefly. You can certainly look at your notes as needed, but don't just look at them simply to avoid looking at the audience. You should smile at them before you begin the speech, but during your speech try to display appropriate facial expressions that go with the point you're making. Maintain good posture. Try not to slouch or lean on the podium. It's tempting, but don't do it. When you move, and you should move, I don't expect you to stand in one spot for the entire speech. It should be with purpose. Don't pace back and forth. That's distracting. Don't fidget with your hair or stick your hands in your pockets. Be aware of your foot and body movements. People tend to move their feet while they're speaking. They shuffle or step back and forth or even sway from side to side. All those things become distracting if you do them for more than a few seconds. When you move, it should be to make a point, to move to the screen to point something out to the audience, or move back to the podium to change the slide, not just to walk off your nervousness. And try to avoid physical barriers. If you start off speaking from behind the podium, don't stay there because it feels safe. Move out from behind it to connect with your audience. Remember, the audience is the most important thing about your speech, so you need to help influence their response to you and your information. First, make sure the audience can see you and your visual aids. When you're up there in front of the audience, that's your space, and you need to make it work for you, your topic, and the audience. If you need to adjust or move something, you can do it. Involve the audience by mentioning them in your speech, letting them know why they should listen, or mentioning another person's speech, or asking direct or rhetorical questions of them. Respect their time by keeping your speech within the time limits. You may need to adjust what you do to accommodate audience members with disabilities, like moving closer to that person when showing something to make sure they can see you. And while we simply don't have time for a question and answer period during speech days, you will likely need to be prepared to answer questions about your presentations in other classes or in the workplace. The book goes into detail about that, so make sure that you read it. Once you have your complete sentence outline written and you're ready to begin to practice your speech, you need to create your speaking outline. This is done using note cards. You distill your complete sentence outline down into short phrases and key words and transfer them to your note cards, keeping the same basic structure and numbering the cards so you can keep them in order. Write the words large enough for you to easily read them at a glance. If the words are too small, you'll be staring at them too much. In the module, there's an example of typical note cards so you can see what they should look like. Plan to practice your speech in stages. One practice session isn't enough. What you want to end up with is a version of your complete sentence outline, not an exact replica of it. But I like to start by reading my complete sentence outline out loud a couple of times just to get the flow of it. Don't read the topic, specific purpose, and thesis. Start with the introduction because that's what you do during delivery. Then start practicing using your speaking notes, but do it in stages. Practice the introduction by itself, then each main point by itself, then the conclusion. Then start putting the whole thing together, incorporating the visual aid into the process. By this point, you should start timing your speech, making sure it falls within the time requirements. Once you're happy with it, ask a family member or friend to watch you deliver it and give feedback to you. Most people are happy to do this. You can also record yourself, then look at the recording to make sure your vocal variety and body language are appropriate, and then make changes to your delivery as necessary. If you follow these tips, you'll be fully prepared and ready to go on speech day. Okay, you're ready to move on to MindTap.